talking about policies coming through. Well, we'll see about that one. But remember the European Union? Well, they did put up a report about elections. But yes, we've got two gentlemen who will be joining us this morning to shed some light and probably don't heat on this matter. Jacob Pella is the founder and CEO of TAF Africa. TAF Africa is a critical partner of European Union's Partners for Governance project. He'll talk more and explain to us that context. But in Kano, we also have Ali Mohammed Ali, who is a former Deputy Director of Media and Publicity for APC's Presidential Campaign Council. Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Chamberlain.
Well,
good morning, Mark.
All right. So I'm just going to read.
Good morning, Chamberlain and Mark.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to go through parts of Mr. Alake's statement. Then we'll also look at parts of the EU statement so that both of you can just jump right in, because that's first the EU put up a report about the elections, and then the special advisor to the president on special duties and communications and strategy, Mr. Dele Alake, did put up a response to that. So he says, part of that statement read, sometime in May, we alerted the nation through a press statement to the plan by a continental multilateral institution to discredit the 2023 general elections conducted by INEC. The main target was presidential election, clearly and fairly won by the then candidate of the APC, President Bola Tinubu. Well, part of it also says there is no substantial evidence provided by the EU or any foreign and local organization that is viable enough to impeach the integrity of the election. And then it says, we would like to know, and even asked EU, how it reached the conclusions in the submitted final report with the very limited coverage of elections by the observers, who without doubt relied more on rumors, hearsay cocktails of prejudiced and uninformed social media commentaries and opposition talking heads. And then let me jump to this part where he says, we have many reasons to believe the jaundice report, based on the views of fewer than 50 observers, was merely to sustain the same premature denunciatory stance contained in EU's preliminary report. And then the key part where he says, we strongly reject in its entirety any notion and idea from any organization, group, and individual remotely suggesting that the election was fraudulent. And then if you look at part of the EU report, from which this comment is directed, part of that report, on that 25th February election, the part where they talk about the day and results, the EU said elections held on schedule but lack of transparency and operational failures reduced trust in the process and challenged the right to vote. There was late opening in almost all polling units observed, mainly due to delayed arrival of sensitive materials and polling staff, and then several other parts of it where it says that the overall conduct of opening was evaluated as bad or very bad in 21 out of the 50 polling units visited. There's several parts of this report, almost 94 pages of it, a lot of it, part of which we'll be talking about today. Gentlemen, but Mr. Pele, the context is that you were part of this. You were there when this happened. Tell us about it.
Let me do what I would call a soft disclaimer. I don't work for the European Union. I don't speak for the European Union. The European Union funds part of my project, which is related to governance. And so I participated in several fora where there was a roundtable discussion by the civil society around this report. And so I think I took time out to read the report and also read the press release by the State House, Mr. Alake, you know. And it's unfortunate when issues are not or are even taken out of context, you know. I think, in my opinion, I don't think the report is focusing on the illegitimacy of the president. No, I don't think so in any way. Rather, they presented what is obvious and some of the things that are in the public space and what people know about the election. There were issues around this election, may not have anything to do with the elected, it's the system that we should be interrogating and speak to. And of course, for me, I would prefer we dwell on the way forward. Are there recommendations in the report that the current administration needs to speak to? I'm expecting, and I haven't seen that, the president invest time, just like we have economic agenda. Let's have an electoral reform agenda, because the electoral system has a lot to be interrogated and corrected. Otherwise, we'll keep having the same thing. So most of the component of the report which I have read, I found to be very accurate. I'm not going to concern myself to issues about, the outcome, but I'm going to concern myself about issues about the process, which is very important to me. And if we don't fix it, we'll keep having the same thing.
Do you think that there were any parts of this report that could have been interpreted as a foreign institution trying to assault the credibility of the electoral process?
I don't think so. There's never the intention of most foreign entities that comes to support us. It's never their intention to undermine the sovereignty and integrity.
Well, intention is one thing.
Yes.
Actions.
Well, I haven't seen much. I'm not in the diplomatic space, but I haven't seen much of that action. Rather, I have seen huge investment of resources, investment of manpower by several institutions, foreign institutions, to help in any way they can. Yes, there are issues. There are some of them that also have, like you rightly said, ill intentions. But however, in this context, and in what I think the EU have done, the intention was never to undermine the process or the integrity of our product, which is the outcome, or the sovereignty of the country. No, that's not correct.
So were you taken aback by the pretty strongly worded statement?
I was in a bit, especially the fact that some of the presentation, I think maybe somebody did not thoroughly interrogate that report and read it to a large conclusion.
Which part?
Well, the part that speaks about the preparation of the team.
That there are 50 observers?
Yeah, no, well, a bit of that, but however, now, there's a process that every observer mission undertakes when they are coming to a country. And it's in line with the principle of the United Nations principle of election observation. I don't think the EU violated that principle. Now, he was talking about them coming in January. They didn't come in January. They were here in October, they were here in November, not the entire team, like observatory mission, and they interacted with everybody. And besides, for every diplomatic mission or observation mission, they will have to meet with INEC and come on the invitation, at the invitation of INEC. So the preparation was absolute. Another thing, Chamberlain, that you need to know about this report is that the EOM, or the European Union Observation Mission, is totally independent of the European Union. They're totally independent. As a matter of fact, the European Union did not have a say. The delegation here did not have a say in that report. They participated just like every other person, but they were not their spokesperson. Neither am I their spokesperson, but I'm just telling you the process I was part of, the report that I read, and some of the outcomes and the takeaways that this government needs to pay attention to.
All right, Ms. Ali, having listened to Mr. Pele, there are those who may think that, and then referring to Mr. Alake's statements, that there might have been some misunderstanding concerning the background in terms of what went in putting in this report, and so you might have misconstrued the intention and taken it out of context. But give us your impression of why you thought, or if you, of course, I think you justified the statements. Go ahead anyways.
Well, thank you very much once again. You see, the import of the EU Observer Mission report would suggest that the election that brought in President Bola Tinubu was flawed on account of the glitches, especially recorded, especially in IRIV and in the Vivas. That will be appear to be the import of that report, which the EU Observer Mission actually released in piecemeal. The first time, when it faulted the election process, the first report was way back in February. And that was it gave the report in piecemeal, saying that at a much later date, which turned out to be yesterday, that the full report will be released. So the import of that was to give the impression that the elections were flawed in such a manner that takes away the legitimacy of the President Tinubu mandate. Now, as you would see from the reaction of the opposition, which has latched onto this report by the EU, giving credence to the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, the impression. But listening to Mr. Jack Pella here, that footnote was not in the report, actually. So that's the impression the report actually gave. But thankfully, as he explained, that I think it's only one or two reports that I see that is a lot more dispassionate, is that there is a systemic, perhaps, problem with the conduct, especially by the electoral empire. I had wished that someone from the INEC was here to defend the electoral empire on the basis, but it's something that the electoral empire has defended itself in the past. Explaining the reasons why there was not a real-time uploading of the result conducted during the election. And again, if you recall very well, in the course of the February 25th election, and most of the results were, I mean, the fact that they were not really, uploaded in real time do not invalidate the result, because party agents, all of them, certify at the polling unit that the results were authentic. But it would appear that, like Mr. Alake rightly pointed out in the statement, that most of the report was desk job kind of thing, that the EU Observer Mission actually spread itself thin. We had just about 50 observers, so to say, 11 of them analysts, and then 40 of them spread across the vast expanse of Nigeria. So how could that actually capture the processes that eventually gave birth to President Tinubu's electoral mandate to lead the nation? So it would appear that with the footnote now by Mr. Jake Pella, that was clearly not the intention, but that was the import. That's the perception a lot of people had of the report.
Okay, just to say that his name is Mr. Jake Epele.
Jake Epele, okay.
Epele,
okay,
yes.
I beg your pardon?
Yes.
Yeah,
Epele,
yeah.
Just to put that in context. But I'm wondering, is this really a matter of defense? Because, I mean, you said, oh, you know, we should have had INEC here. And we listened to Mr. Festus Okoye, who is the chief INEC spokesperson, director, not director now, but one of the national commissioners who also speaks on voter education and publicity, reacting shortly after the after the EU gave its own report, read out that lengthy report. He was there while it was read out, and he spoke extensively on INEC's impression of the report. And some people have asked, is this really a matter of defense or a matter of actually looking at, knowing or acknowledging that no matter how well-intentioned, that there would have been flaws in a process, and as a result, something that we all should work on and see how we can correct. As I'm looking at this, there's even something for media. There's something for social media. So isn't this about, taking on board some of the observations that have been highlighted and then saying, hopefully, moving forward, we will do better? Can you hear me, Mr. Ali?
Well, yeah, I missed something. I missed the latter part of what you were saying. I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I was saying that, is this really about defense or about looking at what was imperfect? I mean, unless you want to say that we had perfect polls, and everyone will say, of course we didn't have perfect polls. The question is, isn't this about looking at what was imperfect in our elections? Would it be to working towards perfection? Can you hear me, Mr. Ali?
I missed that again once more, but I had the part about defense.
Okay, so I am just asking, yes, I'm just asking, should it be more about defense or about working towards perfection? That's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, I think it's not so much about defense now that some of these things have come to the fore now. The footnote provided by Mr. Jack here. Yes, I think it's about, you see the whole thing, when you're dealing with processes.
Go ahead, I can hear you.
Okay, if you're dealing with processes that involve machine and man, processes that involve technology, you expect there will be glitches. It's work in progress. Certainly some of the observations by the EU, they are very valid. I agree totally. I'm in support of the election we had on February 25th. Indeed, the whole of 2023 election cannot be by any stretch of the imagination be compared with the election we've had in the past, especially the one conducted in 2007. So it's work in progress, and I'm sure the electoral empire would take note of some of the recommendations made there, especially as it concerns technology, and especially as it concerns some of the lofty goals the electoral body set for itself. So I think, yes, these are some of the observations they made. Systemic problems, I think they can be addressed. In 2007, the late President Umar Yar'Adua, whose election was hotly contested by the former president, acknowledged that, look, the election that brought him to office was flawed, but they would take recommendation. The recommendation made, and by 2011 we had some progress. And if you recall, because it was work in progress by 2015 when the smart card reader was introduced, and I think this was how I think that election too brought for the first time an incumbent government at the center was dislodged. Some people gave credence to the improvement on the electoral process. So yes, some of the observations made by EU, they are valid, they are certainly valid, they are systemic problems. And I'm sure that going forward, some of the observed lapses will be addressed. And another issue I always make when opportunities like this come is, look, sometimes we focus, what about those actually conducting the election? There's some politicians, supporters, and every other stakeholder in the process. You just mentioned about the media, the media too, the security. So this is a whole lot of processes involved. And I'm sure going forward, we make some of these observed lapses definitely.
So the question for us, I think the question is, why then this strongly worded statement. I mean, I'm looking at the statement released by Mr. Dele Alake. I mean, accusing a body of you know, assaulting a country's sovereignty. These are very heavy words in the international circle. And I'm wondering, you know, what precisely in this report, and I have a copy right here, could have constituted or could have warranted the State House to release a report accusing the European Union Observer Mission of saying that you are assaulting our sovereignty by this report of yours. Have you read the report? What precisely in it, for you, constitutes an assault on Nigeria's sovereignty?
Now, you see, the EU Observer Mission wasn't the only mission that actually was in Nigeria to observe the election that was conducted. There was the African Union, there was the Commonwealth, and locally we also had the Nigerian Bar Association that had over 1,000 field men, so to say. And at the time they released their report, it wasn't in piecemeal. They issued that in February. The EU issued the first release, report in February. I remember very well. Now, in all of this, in all of the others who also were observed the election that brought in the incumbent president, they gave a report and gave a fairly, if you like, a fairly neutral, so to say. But you see, like we said now, given what has transpired now, especially the explanation given, it would mean that the way they handle the whole thing, I mean, the way the EU gave the opposition latch onto it, gave the impression that, look, all they were after is actually to take away the legitimacy of the election process. But like you said now, like Mr. Jack Epella, I hope I got the name right, that was not the intent.
Lagos?
Well, Mr. Pella, let me ask you this. A good number of people, you know, do agree with the EU, but then at the same time we have a number of people, like the presidency, for instance, who are kicking against. Looking at page 10 of the EU report, it lists 6 priority recommendations that largely talk about policies or, you know, legal framework, operational framework, and consequence management, largely. I mean, if one would sum it up, that is what it will come to from just a quick glance. From where you sit and what you know, are there areas that you think are indeed, I mean, because I think it was you or Mr. Ali who also said that there hasn't been one election since 1999 that has not been contested in our country, Nigeria. So in which of these areas, in the area of legal framework, operational framework, or consequence management, that we actually lack or fall short?
Thank you.
Mr. Pella, that's for you.
Look, I think there's something we need to fix, a statement that keeps resonating. And this comparison of this past election and several other elections, why must we live in trying to compare the past when we want to go forward? I think if you consider the enormous resources, the over 92 million registered voters that registered for this election and the resources that was imputed in this election, you can't compare it with other elections. So we had a lot of resources, vast resources, technology and everything to do a better job. And so let's stop trying to compare the past when we want to move forward. You know, to take a man's vision, just take him to the past. He will forget the vision. So let's look forward. But in answer to your question, there are several issues that needs to be fixed. The issue of electoral reforms will address these 6 thematic, summarized recommendation. Don't forget that there are 23 other recommendations in the report, but this is summarized recommendation that we need to focus on. And like they recommended, issue of affirmative action for women. I mean, look at the appalling result we have in the inclusion of women, persons with disability. You know, the legal systems are not robust enough to address some of the issues that played out during the election. You know, people have very, very minor holistic trust, even in the judiciary that is currently interrogating issues that was raised as a result of the outcome of this election. You know, of course, although that shouldn't be the case, we should trust our system and ensure that our system will produce not necessarily general expected result, but what is accurate, what is truth, what can be verified, you know. And so
right.
These are certain issues that needs to be addressed. You know, even the current Electoral Act has its own loopholes that needs to be addressed.
Right.
A review of all of these things will bring us to where we want to be. Let's not keep talking about where we used to be,
right,
when we want to go where we want to be.
Well, I think the rationale
me,
as well,
you know,
pardon me, Mr. Pele.
Say that again.
Because of time, I'm trying to squeeze in as much questions as we can. But I think the rationale behind this question is, you know, we still have the same, will I say, manpower, the same people managing that system. Yes, technology may have changed, but it's essentially the same framework for, you know, election managers, it will seem. But allow me to add this one. There have been questions about the methodology of the report itself. In fact, in that statement by Mr. Alake, he was talking about the, you know, number of observers, 40 election observers, even though the EU's report put the number of observers at 110 when it summed it from 25 EU member states. But the methodology, particularly the number of polling units visited, how appropriate is it to now extrapolate? Imagine if, 200 polling units were visited out of the hundreds of thousands in Nigeria. How appropriate is it to then extrapolate and say, because we monitored this number of polling units, then we can say conclusively that the election was not as transparent, fell short of what INEC promised?
Okay, Mr. K, what people should know, or what Nigerians should know, is that the EU Observers Mission, even though they are independent and they formed independent opinion, they have their network. Many of us were part of the people that kept talking to them, kept giving them information. You know, there are countless observers, you know, from the stable of the European Union partners. And don't also forget that there are other countries, Canada, that supported this process. So their finding is not necessarily based on those numbers that you're seeing, but they did a thorough, extensive work, very, very investigative, before they formed that opinion. So you can't dismiss it with a wave of hands. You can't say these things are not, you know, they had their methodology. And don't forget, there is a lay-down principle or instrument signed. Nigeria is part of the countries that signed the principle of electoral declaration and observation by the United Nations. The European Union are very thorough. I'm not here to speak for them. I'm not trying to defend them, but I'm just stating the obvious. They're very thorough. They will not invest in a process or release a product that they didn't do a thorough investigation and interrogation to come to a conclusion, you know. And that's why I keep saying, let us take the positives and see how we can make good and perfect our electoral system. Mr. President, I think you need to invest more time and energy on electoral reform, just like you're doing very well, investing time and energy in the economy and all the systems and all the corrupt people who are stealing from this country. Like I always said, this country, we don't need any loan. Get all the corrupt people and the money that they have taken and put in their bank, and we don't have to take any loan. Let's take the loan from those who are holding our money.
All right, gentlemen, we have to thank both of you. Mr. Jacob Pella, founder, CEO, TAF Africa, as well as Ali Muhammad Ali, former Deputy Director, Media and Publicity for the APC's Presidential Campaign Council. Thank you both for coming on today.
Thank you, Chamberlain. Thank you, Mowgli.
All right, we're back in just a moment.
Thank you, Chamberlain. Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be back and continue from Lagos.